Well, good evening, everybody. Lovely to have you here. My name is Robert Logan, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. We're getting a bit of feedback from the TVs. Should I just... That might be better. It's the technology that always gets us, isn't it? Okay. A special welcome to all of you who are here with us tonight, and a special welcome to all of you who are watching online from, we know we have regular viewers in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, and we also have some from overseas, so welcome to you all. I know that there is a Keith Urban concert in Sydney, in Newcastle tonight. And as well as a big football game between the Newcastle Jets and Cooks Hill United. Yay! Yes, it starts at 7:30, so you'll probably have time for the second half. If you've come here to heckle or make a political speech, you've come to the wrong event. But Newcastle has been a place of sharing ideas and learning for thousands of years. And we are proud to continue that tradition. We pay our respects to the original custodians of this land, the Worimi and the Awabakal peoples, to elders past and present. And we thank all people who have made Newcastle a place where we can continue to explore and discover new ways of thinking, new ways of doing, new ways of being. Newcastle Institute was formed in 2004 to promote rational and respectful discussion of diverse ideas that impact on us all as we live in our communities, and to learn and discuss these sometimes complex and difficult issues in a respectful way. High-speed rail between Sydney and Newcastle has been on the agenda for decades. Since the 1980s, there have been many investigations and proposals, with persistent financial and engineering challenges combined with a lack of commitment stalling any progress to date. High-speed rail in Japan has been a reality since 1964, with the first Shinkansen operating between Tokyo and Osaka. China, utilising technology from Germany, Japan and Italy, opened its first high-speed rail in 2008 and now has over 12,000 kilometres of high-speed rail. High-speed rail has been a reality in Europe since the 1970s. There are some rail corridors in the United States classified as high-speed, but their average speed is only 100 or 110 kilometres an hour, although there are some faster, very short sections. The current Australian government has a vision for a high-speed rail network from Melbourne to Brisbane, across the east coast. The first stage is proposed to connect Newcastle to Sydney in an hour. But will it be a reality? It's my pleasure to welcome Tim Parker, the inaugural Chief Executive Officer of the newly formed Australian Government's High Speed Rail Authority. With more than 30 years of experience delivering complex infrastructure projects across Asia, in Australia, and including our biggest public transport projects, Sydney Metro, NorthConnex, and Hong Kong International Airport, Tim is ideally placed to achieve this vision. With the establishment of the High Speed Rail Authority office in Newcastle and a business case submitted to government, could this finally be happening? There may be many sceptics, maybe some of you here, but this is an opportunity to put aside rumour, put aside guesswork, and hear the facts. This is an opportunity to hear about the opportunities, the challenges to deliver such a significant project. After Tim speaks, it's going to be your turn to ask questions. Not make statements, ask questions. But now, would you please join me and welcome Tim Parker.
Well, what an introduction. Thank you, and thank you to all of those that come out tonight. Speaking to some ladies earlier on, I hope I'm better than the telly tonight, so that's the challenge. What I'd like to do first of all is just acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to them and their cultures and to the elders past and present. I understand we're on Warramil land at the moment. A couple of things I'll just say before we get into this. One, I don't have a decision from government. So what I'm going to do today is present what the plan is, but the rider is we're still waiting for government for a decision. But notwithstanding that, I think it's a great opportunity to give you an idea of what we're planning. I certainly recognise there's been a few promises for Sydney to Newcastle, or Newcastle to Sydney over the years. And so I accept there's some scepticism. But open your hearts, open your eyes, and let's run through this. First of all, I'd like to start with a little video. Okay, wow, that's done my ears no end of good. Look, hopefully it gives you an idea. It's a very exciting project. But what we're talking about here is a lot of the schemes before have been about links between Newcastle and Sydney. This is about a national high-speed rail network. And as someone who's always worked in transport, what became really clear right from the day go on this is a regional economic project. It's not just about the transport.
Louder, please.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll go back a bit. So this is a regional economic project. It's about what it does to the regions, not just about getting from Sydney to the regions. It's about what it actually does to the regions. It's about housing. It's about employment. It's also actually unlocking the great regional economies that are around. And that's what it's about. And of course, last but not least, it's contributing to Australia's net zero contribution. Okay, so I think as we said before...
Before we go on, can we get this other screen going?
Oh, sorry. Okay, we'll hold, because there's half of this half, I'll tell you all about it. This half, well... The message is, pay your money early, get to the next. I'm not political, you'll find that out very soon. I think I shouldn't have made the comment about watching TV at the beginning. I should have just shut up. Welcome the right-hand half the room, you're back. Lovely to see you. Okay, get ready. So, look, the idea of the network will run from Melbourne through to Sydney, Sydney through to Brisbane. The first stage being Newcastle to Sydney. And what you have to try and imagine, I know travel times, when I did my first presentation on high-speed rail, I was talking to a group from Newcastle, and I made the mistake of saying it was about 2.5 hours. And a guy at the back said, if you're lucky. And I remember that because it's not just travel times, it's about reliability and the fact that you can turn up and it will get there on time. So we're looking at a high-speed rail that will go from Newcastle to Sydney in an hour, and also from Newcastle to Central Coast in half an hour, Central Coast into Sydney in half an hour. Fundamentally changing how Sydney works. The benefits are, of course, far beyond just a quick trip to Sydney. It means, of course, people from Sydney can come to Newcastle. And it will provide real opportunities in the region for doing things different. So, someone asked me whether I was a politician. The answer is no. I'm an engineer by trade and delivering projects. So, High-Speed Rail Authority was set up in 23, I joined in 24. Our priorities are to advise government on planning and developing and overseeing the construction and operation of the national high speed. It's very important we've got the word construction in there because that probably got me the job. We have to coordinate with the states and the territories because these projects aren't just federal, you've got to have federal and state. What we've done so far, we've delivered the Newcastle to Sydney business case. That went in December 24. We also delivered the product definition report. This is a national blueprint for what the national railway would look like. And the reason we had to do that is we had to understand what was the sort of trains and systems we needed for the whole network. And they will be the ones that will be adopted for Newcastle to Sydney. So the trains that we're developing here must be designed to go not just to Newcastle from Sydney, but also onward to Brisbane and also on to Melbourne. We also opened our national high-speed rail hub in Newcastle, 175 Scott Street. Please feel free to go along and meet the team down there. They're very happy to answer questions. And as the photograph shows, We're starting our engineering young. Okay, the next slide. This is not one of our slides. This was produced by a guy called Bernard Salt. Many of you would have probably heard. One of the first challenges when you talk about high speed is there's a lot of people telling you why it won't work in Australia. And Bernard was great. He said, well, you have to remember, the east coast of Australia is growing rapidly. His projections are by 2051, we'll have 28.5 million people, an increase of 33% on the east coast. And you compare that to other countries, UK, US. This is a country that grows. It continues to grow. It has always grown. So what does that do? This is the, I guess, the density myth. If you take the population of the East Coast and you spread it across all of Australia, it's not very many people. But when you actually look at the East Coast as an area, it's about 2% of the land mass of Australia, yet we've got 60% of the population in that strip. And so when you do the maths, you end up with about 104 people per kilometre all the way along the East Coast. And that compares very well with Spain and France. But then you look more closely and you say, what's happening between Sydney and Newcastle and the Central Coast? 624 people. So from our perspective, there are plenty of people to catch high-speed rail, making it a very viable product. Oh no. Okay. So again, the question has arisen, why Newcastle to Sydney? Why not Canberra? Why not somewhere else? Well, you've actually got the two largest cities in New South Wales, in Newcastle and Sydney. Makes a lot of sense economically to combine them and using Newcastle as a global gateway. The population in this region, as you are well aware, is expected to grow. It's expected to grow nearly 22%, or 1.2 million by the early 2040s. The other thing, of course, is the existing railway line. I won't do a show of hands about how many people use it, but it's actually one of the busiest corridors in the country. Nearly 15 million passengers a year use that corridor. And then the M1 motorway, about 32 million. So actually, it's a corridor that is incredibly busy. This is just something that I didn't want to give you nightmares, but I think what we found is that everyone in this corridor has got an M1 story. None of them are very good. So the reality is that at the moment we've got a railway line that is nearing capacity, and we've got the M1 that if something goes wrong, it's really bad. It doesn't go wrong a little bit, it goes wrong a lot. So the cost of the status quo. So one of the things, when you're trying to promote a very big business case, the first thing that the good folks in Treasury ask us is, do we have to do this? What if we do nothing? And it's a really good question. But I think for this particular corridor, it's really interesting because you've got a motorway nearing capacity. You've got a railway line that is very close to capacity. And in fact, as more passengers go on, the ability to run freight on that line is getting less and less. So the reality is there is a do-nothing option for this corridor. If you don't do high-speed rail, what do? Do you try and widen the M1 with all the difficulties around that? What do you do with the 15 million passengers if you want to try and upgrade the line? And believe me, they have studied it and studied it and studied it. So high-speed rail really does offer a genuine alternative and a very viable alternative. So what is the product? What is the thing we are looking at? Well, as I said, it's a new national high rail. What we're proposing is we're not looking at maglevs or anything else. It will be trains similar to the ones you find in Europe, Japan, and the rest of Asia. In other words, let's not do the Australian thing and try and reinvent the wheel. Let's follow what other people are doing very successful. These trains will travel up to a top speed of 320. They will be on a dedicated line. In other words, not a mixture of freight and old passenger trains, dedicated. And that gives us a very high level of reliability. We're saying greater than 98%. Famous story, the Shinkansen, the driver apologised for being 25 seconds late. I don't think I've heard anyone apologise in Australia for being 25 seconds. And of course, it will be easy access so people can get on and off. We've talked about the journey times. The longer journeys, Brisbane to Sydney and Melbourne to Sydney, about 4 hours. But there'll be real benefits for the travel time between Newcastle and Sydney. At an hour, probably twice as fast as a car, a bit faster still in rush hour. On-board services, again, train travel has come along around the rest of the world. Once you're on the train, high-speed Wi-Fi, food and drink, premium services, quiet zone, and we're following Virgin's lead by allowing dogs and cats on the train as well. You don't have to bring one, but if you want to, you can. So I think it's important to understand, and I think I won't do a show of hands again tonight, but National High Speed Rail, it's not a suburban rail, it's not a metro, it's a different form. It's a competitor to the airlines to travel over long distances. So the characteristics are fast services. It doesn't have stops everywhere. In fact, you have to integrate with other transport. So you have limited number of stops, but it means that the travel times between cities is fast. We are looking at competitive fares. The fare we're looking at is competitive with the unsubsidised Sydney trains fare or the Greyhound bus. And for those that don't catch the Greyhound bus, that's about $37 from Newcastle to Sydney. We're also looking, obviously, at providing options. So again, during off-peak hours, you can charge less and you can actually balance your load across the day. And I think the other thing that has been shown to be time and time again is the tourism and leisure industry. High-speed trains, once you've travelled 12 or 24 hours to get to Australia, you don't really want to get on another aeroplane. So actually being able to get onto a train and travel around our great country is there. This is just a little analysis of travel time. Often the airlines quote an hour and a half, Sydney to Melbourne. Well, I think we all know that that's, again, is if you're lucky, because invariably not many people live at either airport. You've got to travel to the airport. You've got to get to the airport early. You've got to go through all the security. So at 4 hours, potentially the travel time by train is a little bit longer, but how much more productive? You've got a seat, you're on the train, you can have a cup of coffee, you can work. In fact, in Europe, they actually have dedicated carriages where you can have your meeting on the train while you're travelling. So again, we think it's a real competitive to the airlines, and also providing a CBD to CBD type journey rather than a myriad of different changes to get you to the airport and then get from the airport. Station locations. My experience on Metro is everyone wants a station, and it will probably be the same for here. We have to locate the stations, and in doing that, what we think about is there other transport to integrate it with? Housing opportunities, supporting new jobs. Can we actually create a precinct to actually make the place desirable to come to, regardless of whether you're going to catch a train or not? We also think about the environmental impact, and of course, value for money. I'll just talk a little bit about delivery. Unfortunately, in our country, Australia has punching above its weight in delivering mega projects over the last 10 years. We've had Sydney Metro, you've got Melbourne Metro, you've got WestConnex, you've got a myriad of big projects. One of the biggest challenges for government is people like myself tell them it's going to cost them a certain amount of money and it'll be delivered in a certain time. Unfortunately, that has not always been successful. So what we've got to do with this project, it's a big project, it's an expensive project. We've got to do more to work out how can we deliver this more effectively, and we'll need to work closer with government and closer with the industry to actually come up with good principles of delivery, including looking at the environmental impact and, of course, the community and stakeholder interests. One of the things we're looking at is an advanced manufacturing facility. For these projects, one of the big challenges in the construction industry is we're still in the 18th century. We bring all our materials to site, we assemble them on site, we then try and pour wet concrete in the rain, and we wonder why we don't have a very productive industry. What we're looking at doing is actually building many of the components off-site. This will be done by an advanced manufacturing facility. And what that means is that the work on site is limited, but we're also actually creating a new manufacturing industry, something that the country needs. From that, we will end up with lower costs, a much safer environment. But more important than that is that whilst it's very beneficial to high-speed rail to build such a thing, it's a permanent facility. So in other words, once it's been built, it can do components for roads, hospitals, houses. Again, it moves our industry from being unproductive to productive, which is what we'd like to do. I think the other thing that's important, having travelled to the States, the UK and Europe, we have a habit in Australia of bringing everything in. So this project has got to be about best value, not least cost. And what I mean by that is, as part of our procurement, we will be promoting local manufacture. One of the things we've been talking to international industries is saying, what will it take? So rather than saying you must manufacture things here, is what will it take? That could be we have to provide the land, it could be tax concessions, I don't know yet, but we do want international expertise here. We also want to take a slightly different view than is currently being taken. Currently, we have a made in Queensland, a made in New South Wales, a made in Victoria approach. Last time I looked, we're one country. So we're going to take a made in Australia look. And I think that's so important because these industries, with the right specialties spread across the country, can be very profitable. But if you try and do everything in every state and you repeat it, you end up undercooking it. Last but not least is training and skills transfer. Everywhere that has successfully brought in high-speed rail has also made sure that as part of the process people are trained and there's a skills transfer. And I think we talked earlier about China, very clever people. They got the Germans, the French, Japanese in. They took their best ideas and developed them. They're now building their own trains, they're doing their own things. Similar opportunities lie there for Australia in that we don't have all the skills to develop this at the moment, but we've got a lot of the skills and we'll just need a few and transfer them across to us. Net zero. I think this is an incredibly important thing for us. At the moment, transport sits around about third as our biggest carbon emission across the country. Also, we know that airline travel is likely to increase significantly. The CSIRO expect the jet fuel usage to increase by 75%. So interesting, some work done in the UK. The air travel produces about 134 grams of CO2 emission per person per kilometre. Using a high-speed rail, 4 grams. So a 99% reduction. And again, those graphs show what high speed does. It is a very, very effective, cost-effective and also environmentally friendly way of actually delivering passengers. This is a little case study from Leipzig in Berlin, Germany. And the reason I put it up is it's not dissimilar to Newcastle. And this is around what happened when you bring high-speed rail. So Leipzig to Berlin was about 190 kilometres away. When they brought high-speed rail in, they reduced the journey time from about 142 minutes to 70 minutes. Since that has happened, The population of Leipzig has increased by 480 to 580,000, whilst the rest of the region has declined. The economic growth of that city has gone up at 2% per annum, and it's outpaced the rest of the region. And the employment growth has also increased by 1% per annum. One of the misconceptions about high-speed rail is that it creates dormitory towns for the big city. And what they're finding overseas is that's not true. So what's happened in Leipzig is the big companies recognise that actually you've got a very good workforce in the region. So companies like Amazon, DHL, BMW and Porsche have all now set up in Leipzig. And actually a lot of the workers actually come from Berlin rather than the other way around. So you get this thing. And I think there's lots and lots of parallels for what Newcastle could do. Look, we've had a lot of community consultation. People have been really, really helpful. Even the people that don't believe what we're doing will ever happen, but at least they're talking to us. Of this, I think my favourite is on the top right there. I drive bloody fast, but I've never been able to get to Melbourne in 4 hours. And he did drive bloody fast. He had this amazing car. But that's what this is about. This is about weaning Australians off their car. You can't say to someone, I can save you 10 minutes. But imagine Newcastle to Sydney in an hour, in comfort, from CBD to CBD, no tolls, no parking. Got to be a lot to like about that. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. This is a couple of photographs of the National High Speed Rail Hub. Please feel free to pop in, it's just down the road. Lovely coffee shop next door, by the way, as well. I'd recommend it. Come in and have a chat. We've got a few videos, we've got a few other things. Always happy to talk to people. Hopefully that's provided a bit of an insight into what we're doing and how we're doing it. Since we put the business case in, we've been busy refining the business case and getting ready for the next stage. From my point of view, we think hopefully by the end of the year we'll have a decision by government, but when that decision comes, we'll be in a position to move really quickly. But thank you for listening. Very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Perhaps you picked up one of these cards on your way in. If you haven't, there's some more over at the desk as you come in. You'll notice on the back there's a QR code. If you want to scan that, it'll take you to the website and you can stay up to date with all that's happening with the high-speed rail. So that's a good opportunity. Grab one of these cards, scan the QR code at the back and stay right up to date. Now it's time for questions. Robin's going to come around with a microphone. There's a question from a gentleman over here, but I'll give you the microphone, Rob.
Please make sure that it's actually a question.
Thank you. My name's Rob. I just want to know, is it cheaper than AUKUS?
I couldn't possibly comment. What I would say is, and I may get myself into trouble here, but I'll say it anyhow. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about dollars. And everyone gets very scared because they're usually quite big numbers. What we don't talk about is the 100 years of economic value these infrastructure generates. The other thing we don't talk about when we talk about defence is dollars. We talk about percentage of GDP. I'll let you do your own sums on what 2% or 5% of GDP is. I think you'll find that this is a very good investment.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering in terms of the recent Broadmeadow announcement. It's a great opportunity for Newcastle in terms of the Broadmeadow precinct, but in terms of the integration with that project, how do you foresee in the future that high-speed rail will improve integration with sustainable transport within the region? That's my question.
Thank you. Look, Whilst we haven't got a definitive location of stations, we have looked very, very closely at Broadmeadow. Broadmeadow offers a really good opportunity for light rail to be extended to that precinct. It provides a good connection between perhaps Sydney train services and a high-speed service. And when you look around places like Japan, railway stations are more than just railway stations. They create a sense of place. You go there, there's restaurants, there's shops. That's the opportunity to mix high-speed rail, precinct development, housing, offices, those type of things. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And I think it'd be great if we can bring the two together in an absolute fantastic world-class development.
What are the, you mentioned in December, hopefully you'll get a decision from the government. What is that decision and what are the steps that follow through to delivery whenever?
Thanks for that. So the next stage of the project, so we're looking to move to next stage. One of the lessons that's been learned is don't go off and try and build too quickly. Now I know everyone wants you to go and build, but what we found with these big projects, plan, and then when you've done your planning, you then deliver. So our next stage will be very active engagement with the market, where we'll actually go out and get tenders from builders and rail suppliers. We'll then be able to be in a situation where we can go back to government, probably in two years or so, and say, government, we now have a firm price, we have a delivery schedule, we can update the business case with actuals rather than estimate numbers, and then proceed. And then the build period for a project like this will be somewhere between 10 and 12 years.
Hi Tim.
Hello.
You're both an experienced engineer and an experienced project leader. As an engineer, what do you see as the key engineering challenge for the project? And as a project leader, what are you feeling most optimistic about?
Look, the biggest challenge, and look, anyone who drives the M1 or has been on the railway, is topographical. We will end up with a lot of tunnel on this project. Now, a few years ago, that would have been quite a scary prospect, but if you look at the amount of tunnelling we have done, particularly in Sydney recently, as a tunneller who's done a lot of projects, they call Sydney sandstone or Hawkesbury sandstone for tunnellers God's rock, because it's like the Goldilocks of rock. It's not too hard, not too soft. So the tunnelling is the big challenge, because you've got both topographical, you've also got national parks, which you can't just put a swathe through. And so we've got to develop this environmentally sensitively. What causes me the most enthusiasm, I was saying to someone, when I started Sydney Metro, I faced rooms like this. Why do we need a metro? We don't need a metro, it's rubbish. Oh, we've got our train system. Metro opened, everyone's gone, why don't we have more metros? So it goes around. And what I think about high speed is you've got to start. You've got to start. And that's been the problem, is that there's been lots of talk, but no start. Sydney to Newcastle is about 1/10 of the national network. What a great piece of infrastructure to start. Because I can tell you, once you've finished it and it opens, Queensland, Victoria, ACT, they'll all be putting their hand up. And then the government will go, actually, yes, you know what? Proof of concept, let's go. But let's get this first bit going. Because if you don't start, you will never finish. So I think my view is that's what I'm optimistic about. And I think what national high-speed rail could do for the country is what Metro's done for Sydney. Fundamentally change how it operates, how people get around, and provide better equality for people in the regions than just having all the investment in the cities.
Excuse me. Thank you for your speech. It was very interesting. I guess my main question was where this terminus is in Sydney. I'd heard, I think, some chatter a while back that it might have been in Strathfield or Parramatta, but is it intended to terminate now in Central? And secondly, and presumably the tunnelling would be from Brooklyn south through the suburbs to that terminus. Is that about right? And how long would it take, do you think it would as well?
So it's going to take about 10 to 12 years to build. We've been pretty clear that part of about the station location is about having a location where people can get to. And so whatever station we eventually announce, there will be people with different opinions. So I call it, there's the Homebush gang, there's the Parramatta gang, the Sydney Central gang. We think for Sydney, it should be at least one station in Sydney in Central because it's so well connected by all the other. But I think ultimately we think there should be more than the one station. But we think Central is a good starting point.
Tim, thank you. Applaud your local engagement for supply and local supply chain passion that I can see. And what the question was is there's a dollar value, intrinsic value in keeping a local job that I don't think we've tried to talk this to Energy Co, that keeping a job, even if it's the East Coast first before it goes overseas, is that in your mindset that we need to have someone come up with that formula?
Yeah, it very much so. As I said, if you want, it's like when you go to Bunnings and you see something for $1 and you think, how did they produce it for $1? Or how do they produce it, send it on a ship to Australia, sell it, and it's great, it's cheap, good. Probably doesn't last very long, but it only costs you $1, you buy another one. I talked earlier about we have to start thinking about these projects as what is the value of the project, not what is the cost. If you want something cheap, you know where to go to buy it. There is a formula called social value, and that is what we will be using. Social value covers things like apprenticeship training. It covers employment of people unemployed. They're the things that we're looking at, and how do we actually capture not just financial but social value? And that includes local jobs, includes creation of manufacturing opportunities, but also there's jobs both construction but also longer term. That's the idea of the AMF. It's not there just to build stuff for high speed. It will be there for a longer term and do other jobs. And again, building regional economic value. So social value to us is incredibly important. I had a great quote from someone working in the UK recently who is an expert in this. And he said, High Speed 2 got it all wrong. I said, yes, that's true. They've got a lot of things wrong. But he said, what they should have pitched the job as a job creator. Because what happened after Brexit, a lot of their workforce left from overseas, but they also didn't have many other jobs to do. So High Speed 2 provides over 30,000 jobs. And that's actually got real social value, because if they weren't working there, they'd be drawing the dole or doing something else. So social value is what we're going to be focusing on. It's certainly one of the benefits we're looking at as part of the overall picture of why do this project.
Hi. Given how important the first stage is to the overall project and getting Sydney to Newcastle right, if we don't get that right, then it's less likely to extend to Brisbane to Melbourne. Is it an additional risk trying to build in local manufacturing as a priority over the most cost-effective and most reliable solution?
I don't think the two are opposite. I think, as I said on my slide, what happens is if you force local manufacture to the international community. There was a project in Melbourne recently where they wanted to buy rolling stock, and they specified you must manufacture it in Victoria. And what happened, a number of the big organisations walked away. They said, we can't compete, we're not going to compete. What we've said is, let's ask the international market, what will it take? So we're not looking at downgrading the product. We're not saying, okay, we'll go to Joe Blow, who's never built a high-speed rail before, and get him to go. What we're saying to the international market is, if you want to work in Australia, we want you to help us build up our local manufacture. Yes, it may cost us a little bit more, but again, it's this social value. It's not about just the lowest dollar. So, and we don't expect, and I'm very comfortable, especially in Newcastle, that you guys know how to build stuff, but you probably just need a bit of expertise and a bit of investment so you can do it as well. So that's the approach we're taking.
Tim, thank you so much for your presentation. There'll be vested interests like Transurban, airlines, car rental companies, petrol companies, and all the whole range of vested interests who will be impacted by this. With your discussions from overseas high-speed rail systems, how have they managed this? Has it been a government sort of vested interest, or has it been, how have they managed these parties?
Yes, it's interesting. I'll give you an example that I've come across very recently. Canada is about the same stage that we are. They're just in the process. They've gone out to tender to get a group of people to develop. It's on the east coast of Canada, Toronto, that sort of place, to go and develop their high-speed rail. One of their consortia partners is Canadian Air. And the reason is that particularly, and in Europe as well, in France, for instance, you can't take a domestic flight now, you have to take high speed. Now what's happened is the market will have time to move, but if you think about, say, for instance, an airline, they make a lot of money, obviously, on domestic. They also make a lot of money on the international. And places like Sydney, suddenly you'll have slots free where you can actually have an international flight and that. I can't guarantee what they'll do, what they won't do. Spain has managed it very well. France has managed it. Japan's managed it. It seems to work. The example that we were given in Spain was Barcelona to Madrid. It's about 2.5 hours, 600k. Before high speed, 80% flights, 20% train. Now, 80% train, 20% there. So I think it happens, and I think what happens actually is it's not their choice, it's the people in this room's choice and other people. If people choose to take an environmentally friendly solution over one that's less environmentally friendly, and certainly I think that will happen in Australia. It's already happening in Europe, where people make conscious decisions to get a train rather than a plane because of the environmental impact. So I think it will happen. I think we've just got to watch that space.
Thanks for the talk. It makes me feel a bit more optimistic about it. But I promise this isn't a political question, but how much of the project is at risk of, say, a federal or state change of government that could sort of pull funding, or is it sort of like, is it buffered by like some private investment, or is it like wholly reliant on full government commitment for the 12 years?
It's a good question. I'm not a politician, but interesting. I was at a high-speed rail association conference yesterday, and they did really well. They got the politicians in a panel, and what was fascinating, the argument amongst the politicians, this was both Liberal and Labour and an independent, they actually agreed that high-speed rail would be fantastic for Australia. There was a bit of disagreement about which bit should go first. You'll be pleased to know your local member, Sharon Claydon, made a very good point about why it should be Sydney to Newcastle. So these big projects, and I think politically, and I don't want to get political, it's a bit like the question from OCAS. What should happen for a project like this? There should be a long-term commitment. There should be, a 20, 30-year commitment that says we're now going to build the national rail network, and bipartisan support. Haven't seen it for a little while. Inland Rail kind of got there in the end, but hopefully this time both sides of politics will understand that it's good for the country. Get behind it. That's the hope.
Thanks, Tim. Richard Anderson, Committee for Data. You referred to high-speed rail or HS2 in the UK, and also the example of Leipzig. Just a comment on the HS2, despite what I understand, the recent announcements on the cost overruns and the delay in the construction timeframe. My understanding is that the City Council there got its act together in late 2018, 2019, 2020 and developed a regional plan to attract business to the region, even though the train wasn't going to hit the station for like 10, 15 years. And that's resulted in large organisations like the BBC and HSBC and others moving significant parts of their workforce to the city of Birmingham. So hopefully our local burghers in regional councils will do likewise and plan ahead. You referred to the concept of advanced manufacturing facilities. Do I take it from your comments that you're talking more than just the maintenance facility at Kangiangi that the state has built for the city, or broader, not just the maintenance of?
Yeah, we're thinking much wider than that. If you think about, often what happens in Australia, we design something and we're really pleased, and then we say, oh, we want to apply, they're called modern methods of construction. And of course, the designers have already designed something that needs to be built on site. There's an argument, it doesn't happen, or there isn't enough facility. So we're saying, let's start from day one. And remember, what we're looking at with the railway is modularisation, so repeatability. So what we're looking at doing is let's develop a bit, if you like, a list of parts that make up high speed that are manufactured. So when we do Sydney to Newcastle, they're manufactured. When we do, say, Sydney to Canberra, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're actually saying, okay, we'll have 10 more of these, 10 more of those. But there's a manufacturing facility that can do things like all the precast concrete. It can do plant rooms. It can do rail. It can do track form. So we're thinking much wider. We're also thinking of a advanced. So often in Australia we say, oh, we've got a factory, it does all the precast, it's great. It is, but you actually peel back the doors, and what it is they're not pouring concrete in the rain, they're pouring concrete in a shed. They're not taking advantage of digital. They're still doing an awful lot of manual work. What we're looking at is advanced, where a lot of that is done by automation. It also has the ability to bring in a whole new industry here around manufacturing. That's what we're looking at. It's something that is much wider, but it also builds up and changes how we get productivity. Because ultimately, the aim of this project is not just to improve productivity in delivering high-speed rail, but imagine 5% productivity improvement across the whole of the construction industry. Because from my point of view, the cheaper it is, the more we can build. So we've got to actually work at how can we do things better. So that's part of the journey. I hope so. I sincerely hope so. And I'll be honest, we're doing this not just to try and line up with government policy. We're doing it because it actually makes an awful lot of economic sense. You know, if you've seen people trying to pour concrete, particularly rail work, in the rain with a torch on their head, and we wonder why we have quality problems. We can do better. We're a smart country. Let's be smarter about how we construct.
Tim, thanks for your presentation. I had a question about your perspective about state and federal. See this project as a piece of their housing policy, like that when you talk to government representatives, are they seeing this project that way?
Well, that's the message we're giving them. And what we're saying to, when we look at the benefits, now I can build a high-speed rail line. I'm very comfortable with that. I can't necessarily do the zone planning, the settlement patterns. That's all got to be done by the state. So in my view, this is, whilst it is a Commonwealth initiative, the Commonwealth and the states need to work together, because the way you get the benefits is you do rezone around the stations, you do work with the Commonwealth and the state both on training, apprentices, and that this could be a fantastic joint partnership between state and Commonwealth to develop not just the project, but all the benefits that come, particularly housing. I think one of the facts that you may or may not be aware of, that Sydney is now the second most expensive property in the world. That's unreal, isn't it? And so, whilst in Sydney they can densify, which will help, it doesn't help if you can't afford it. So we've got to start looking at how do we solve the housing problem, not for us, but for the next generation and the generation after that. And so I think one of the things high speed rail does is provide the opportunity for people to live perhaps in the region, which is a great lifestyle, but also have access to jobs and education and medical and those things. So it's got to be a combined effort, in my view.
We've got a question from our own Lord Mayor, Dr. Ross Perry. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Rob. I'm off at the moment.
Oh.
Anyway,
Burgers that Richard referred to.
I'd just be interested, from an engineering point of view, do you have to, it seems you're going to have to build a tunnel from Gosford or Woy Woy all the way into Sydney. At the same time, what would be the engineering possibilities of building a ordinary rail at the same time? It's the same tunnel. Like parallel, presumably.
So look, what you find with these projects is it's that classic, while you're there. So while you're there, can you build another tunnel? And while you're there, and I've had this conversation with my good friend from ARTC. Corridors, I think if you're acquiring a corridor, you can make it wide enough. We'll be looking probably at around a 7.6 diameter tunnel, which will take two 7.6 diameter tunnels. To build another tunnel large enough, it increases enormously. And so you basically your size of your tunnelling doubles, the cost doubles, and you say, why would we have an ordinary train and a fast train together? What we are seeing the opportunities in the future though is when we have an intercity run, you can have fast between Sydney and Brisbane, and then also regional trains that stop more often, so you can get the balance. And then you'd actually have certain locations where you could pick up the local train and do it. That's the engineering solution we're looking at the moment.
Mr. Parker, an easy question for you perhaps. Given the integration of infrastructure that you're proposing, Newcastle has a port, potential for future freight and haulage. Will this high-speed rail be passenger focused? What component could be freight? Did the business case really look at the potential for increased freight through Newcastle and the northern corridor of New South Wales as part of the build infrastructure development, or is it entirely separate?
No, I'll give you half and half here. One of the advantages we see of having high speed is obviously it will take passengers away from the existing train line, which is a shared passenger and freight line. The other thing it will do is it will provide opportunities, because you have another link operational, to do more maintenance and modification. And so what we suspect will happen, and what we built into the business case was we couldn't quite qualify it, but a sort of qualitative rather than quantitative benefit of more freight, particularly between Newcastle and Sydney on that line. So yes, but perhaps we are going to look at see what more work we can do on that, because I think that is one of the big opportunities is how do you mix up? What we won't be doing is putting freight on high speed. They've tried that in Germany. Their reliability in Germany now is at 64%. So that is not very good at all. So everyone says dedicated, hit the 98% reliability or increased. That's the best way of going. So that's what we're proposing at the moment, a dedicated line. But the other ones will get benefits, yes.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Tim. Your talk focused a lot on the Newcastle to Sydney leg, but you also gave context to the national plan. Is there any meat on the bone to what the time horizons are for the rest of the project? And following the question about engineering challenges, is the Sydney to Newcastle leg subject to more or less or the most engineering challenges than some of the parts of the other national line?
Oh, that's about 15 questions in there, but I'll try and answer them. Look, I'm an engineer. We like tricky problems. We love them. And one of the reasons why you folks have not had improvements in your service, in fact, your service times have dropped over the years, and it's not through lack of studies, it's because it's really tricky. It's really, really tricky to improve that line. So it is probably one of the most difficult challenges, which is why we think we'll end up doing more tunnel before. But of course, you've got to remember that the amount of tunnelling we've done in the last 10 years is more than we did the century before. We now, in Australia, we are some of the world's best tunnellers. So I think, whilst it's challenging, I think it's possible and feasible, and not without its challenges, but doable. With respect to the other cities, we've done a blueprint. We've sort of done a very high-level blueprint. How would we go to Melbourne? How would we go to Brisbane? What we suspect is everyone sort of thinks that you develop these, you go from Sydney, then you eventually get to Melbourne. What we suspect is that you're more likely to do a leg out of Melbourne, out of Brisbane, and then connect the middles. And the reason for that is that what we've seen, and our studies show the first big economic boost is about first 200 kilometres outside of a city. So suddenly you bring a region from being 2-3 hours away to an hour. That's really good. That's a really big economic boost. Then the next boost you get is when you actually connect the major cities. So you could have a situation where you do Sydney or Newcastle to Sydney first. You may then do Brisbane to Gold Coast, Melbourne to Shepparton, and then you begin to join the dots. And that's what we expect. But at the moment, I'm an engineer, so the more money you give me, the quicker I can deliver. So it's a federal decision.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just a timetabling question. Here in Newcastle, we have the light rail, as you know, that operates every 10 minutes or so. Then you have the other extreme, the XPT, that doesn't seem to operate very much at all. Where do you envisage that this will land timetabling for the high-speed rail?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, and a lot of it comes back to demand. What we suspect is one of the challenges of having a new product is how many people will use it, because we've only got the existing model. We think ultimately, well, to begin with, we think something like 4 trains an hour, so one every 15 minutes. And the reason we think that is we think there's enough people, and we think actually there will be quite a lot of people who currently don't catch trains would catch the trains. But ultimately we see, we've tried to work out what would be the capacity of this network ultimately. And what we see ultimately is around 12 trains an hour. So a high-speed train every 5 minutes between Sydney and Melbourne, maybe 8 trains an hour between Sydney and Brisbane. But that's what they're doing overseas at the moment in a number of places. So once you get these things to work, they go very, very well. But of course, if you keep the fares competitive, you actually get more people travelling. And suddenly you build up the tourist market. And also, if people begin to plan their trips. Places like Italy now, they stop along the high-speed rail. They go, I'll stop here for a few days. Can you imagine flying into somewhere like Melbourne, a few days in Melbourne, stop somewhere in Canberra perhaps, into Sydney, up to Newcastle, then up to Brisbane. What a great trip that would be. So I think there is the opportunity to buy reliable and frequent services, but also ones that leave on time. And I think the best one is the Japanese, who apologise for being 25 seconds late. I'm not going to promise you that, but we will be aiming for 99% reliability.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for your presentation as well. Thank you, it's been very informative. I'm a regular train traveller. I travel on a train every day. My concern is your numbers on the growth projections for the corridor. What's going to happen to the existing network over the next 10 years while this is getting built? Is the money going to be still available for New South Wales trains to keep up the services, to keep up the signalling, to solve all the daily problems that occur on that line. Every day there's a train late, doesn't work, something breaks down. What's going to happen over the next 10 years whilst this project is being built? Is that part of your problem, or is that part of someone else's problem?
I think it's our problem collectively. It's a separate funding source for maintaining the line, and I can't speak on behalf of the state, but I think from everything I have heard, Transport for New South Wales are committed, because even with high-speed rail, that line needs to be reliable. It needs to be able to cater for freight. So I think the investment will carry on. And then hopefully when high speed is up and running, you'll have some choices, which would be great. And you know, some days you may take the scenic route, some days you may go fast, but that'll be up to you. But I don't think there will be a lack of investment just because high speed's coming. I think they're two very separate things.
I've got sort of two questions. What sort of capacity of passenger would it have, or have you got an idea about that? But my broader question is, how will people get to that, just say the Newcastle hub, for example, to actually access that when our current public transport system is very ordinary and the investment's not looking good in that space? And there's also a very, very extreme lack of parking, certainly in the city, and I don't know if that's going to look better anywhere else. So they're the sort of double-barrelled question.
So the sort of trains we're looking at are probably very similar to those found in Europe. So probably we'll probably go for a smaller train, probably an 8-car train. Capacity be around 500. Again, now with respect to the transport integration, you've hit the nail on the head. One of the early schemes in 2013 was to have high speed in Cameron Park. And yep, great, lots of land, very easy to build, but actually very, very difficult to get into Newcastle, in fact, almost impossible. So to be successful, the state and the Commonwealth need to work together. The state does local transport. So let's say, for instance, if it was Broadmeadow will need to have a proper bus service. It will have to have light rail extensions into the city, etc. That all needs to be done in conjunction with this. And the great news is, because it will take a number of years to build this, actually the state needs to lean in and say, okay, our part will be to sort out the local transport. So I think that's something that would need to be done together, because otherwise you build a very nice high-speed rail, but no one can get there, which isn't actually a very successful project.
Tim, I've got a question. What can we do? What do you want us to go away with after this evening, and what can we do to make this happen?
Well, hopefully some of the sceptics in the room, at least a little bit less sceptical, I hope. I hope you understand that I think this is the furthest we've got with the National High-Speed Rail Network. You know, we've got government. The government that announced it is still in power. They have a good majority. People keep saying to me, how do you convince the politicians? I'm afraid that's not in my job description. My job description is about doing the best job I can. So what I'd say is that this is a project that's going to take some time and some effort, and just talk to your politicians. Ultimately, they are servants of the people. And the more people that say, I think this is a good idea, the better. From our point of view, very happy to engage with people if they've got different ideas. But we actually just need public support. That's what's important for this project. Government are currently deliberating on it. And so what we're hoping is that we'll get a thumbs up, big Christmas present or whatever for me and my team. You'll hear the shriek of joy. I'm very committed to this project, you've probably gathered. And the reason I'm committed is I think it's a really good opportunity to do something for our country. And I've spent a lot of time in Newcastle. I mean, what a difference it would make to both Sydney and Newcastle to be linked by a high-speed train. So hopefully this has helped convince some of the sceptics. For those that were already believers, I hope you're going to carry on being true believers.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. When you were talking, it reminded me of a situation, and I'm going to show my age here, when, as a baby boomer, I can remember the discussion that my grandparents had when they talked about getting rid of the Gosford curves. So people who are my age and older will know what the Gosford curves were on the road south of Gosford, and the road went like that. Most little kids were car sick at some stage. And my grandparents didn't use the castle term of tell them they're dreaming, but they didn't think that they would see it happen. Can you imagine going from Newcastle to Sydney on the M1 despite its problems on the Wyong curves and the Gosford curves these days? So to me, I think we have to put infrastructure projects in perspective. Their thoughts about the tunnel under the bridge and NorthConnex would have blown their mind. And that's really only, now I'm going to really show my age, 60 years ago. So I think it's been a great opportunity to hear about some of the challenges, but the opportunities to do a project like this that would make a huge difference to our lives. And while we can be cynical with that cynicism being driven by past failures, I think it's a real opportunity for us to contribute to the thinking around this, particularly when you hear terms like social value and the opportunities it may present. So I'd like to thank you very much, Tim, for tonight, for making such a succinct presentation about such a complex project. So please join me in thanking Tim. And hopefully some of the scepticism has been put aside tonight and we can get behind this, because sometimes I worry about how the future for the generations that follow us in this area, and to me that's a really exciting opportunity for employment and, as you said, social value. So thank you. Next month we're changing tack a little bit and we'll provide more details, but we're looking at the value of arts to Newcastle and the community. So a totally different subject. And again, dating myself, in October, we're having a presentation in acknowledgement that it's nearly 50 years since the dismissal. Again, for those people born after 75, you might not know what that term, the dismissal, is, but I know many of the people here do. So it's an acknowledgement of Gough Whitlam's era and the dismissal and the constitutional implications. We've got Professor Jenny Hocking and Professor Frank Bongiorno. So Jenny wrote the biography of Gough Whitlam, and Frank has spoken here before, a historian from ANU. So that's in October, and I think it will be a very worthwhile exercise for us to think about particularly the constitutional implications of that decision and where it places us now. Our last event for the month is not going to be here, but it's our joint university event that we have focusing on the Asia Pacific, and the previous Foreign Minister Maurice Payne is speaking at that as our last event of the year. So that's just a wrap up of what's happening, and you will get details on our website or different notices that you come out. So thank you once again for coming. Thanks Tim and his office people for helping organise this with Rob. We really appreciate it. It's important that the community is informed all along the way. And thank you for your respectful and considered questions. When we look at Facebook, sometimes we think, oh no, this is not going to be a good night. But luckily, people were respectful and considered in their questions. So thank you for doing that. Thank you, everyone, and good night. Can I just say one more thing? If anyone's had trouble parking, and someone mentioned it to me, just remember